Hi everyone. In this short video, I just wanted to go over the instructions for completing your research paper 1 that is due at the end of the week. So this section, as I have already mentioned earlier, will be a part of your final paper. This is the first part of your final paper where you introduce the study purpose, you talk about the conceptual context, and you share the literature review, gaps in existing knowledge, as well as then propose your research question. So the total length of the paper should be about 5 to 7 pages. But make sure that you are, in those 5 to 7 pages, you are addressing each of these sections. So the study purpose, the conceptual context, literature review, and gaps in existing knowledge, the research question, and then finally your an appendix, which is your personal and professional experience. And I will delve into each of these. So what I would recommend for doing, one of the best ways to write this paper, this section of the paper, is to make sure that you are including subheadings for each category, just so that it is clear and distinguished in your paper about when you're talking about the study purpose versus what the conceptual context is versus what the literature review is, and so forth. So instead of just writing a straight 5 pages of narration and then having your research question at the end, I highly recommend that you have subheadings for each category. So the first section, which is the study purpose, worth 5 points, is where you introduce the study. So think of the study purpose as the introduction piece or as the background piece. So here you will introduce your topic. You will provide some background on the topic based on literature, right? So how is that different from literature review? Because here you are essentially focusing on pulling from any literature, pulling necessary stats if needed, pulling prevalence or incidence reports if needed, or so instead of reporting on specific literature on the subject, what you're doing in this section is setting up your topic. You're talking about what exactly this study will focus on, and you are addressing the very important so what piece, right? So what is this topic that you're studying, and why is this topic of interest, or why should it be of interest to the reader, right? So why, besides your personal interest in the topic, why should the broader audience care about, for instance, self-care among social workers, right? So that's sort of what you are introducing in the study purpose section. Provide citations wherever relevant. All of your anything that you're stating as a fact will of course need to be backed up by a reference. Again, like I mentioned, this is not where you talk about your literature review, but you can still draw from existing literature to make the case on why this is an important topic, what the topic is, and why we should care. So after the study purpose section, you will talk about the conceptual context. Here is where you introduce the key concepts related to your study, and you define the concepts operationally in terms of what it means, right? So for example, if your study looks at positive mental health among graduate students, you are defining what you mean when you say positive mental health, right? If your study focuses on burnout, then define what burnout means. Again, draw from existing literature to define the concepts clearly. So identify some of the key concepts related to your study, that is directly related to your study, in fact, and provide operational definitions or descriptions of each of the context, and again, cite literature as needed. Finally, you will move on to your literature review and gaps in existing knowledge. So here you're specifically focusing on existing literature that has looked at your topic. It might have looked at a very similar research question or the same research question that you have in a different population, or it might have done it might include a quantitative study or a mixed method study on the topic that you're now looking at qualitatively. So gather, and this is something that you should have already been working on all this time, is gather all the existing literature or articles that are directly relevant to your study, that directly inform your research question, and then provide a comprehensive summary or a synthesis of the literature review. So here you are not saying, for example, study A found X, study B found Y, study C found Z. You're not defining what each of these studies did, what methodology they followed, and then what findings each study had. Rather, you are synthesizing them based on either the variables they studied or what were the key things that they found, or if you can group it by population. So whatever would make sense to summarize or synthesize your literature review, that's what you're doing in this section. And then at the end of the section, you will highlight, well, what are the gaps in the existing knowledge, right? So what is not known about this topic? Where is the gap? If it's a topic where you've noticed that something hasn't been done in the last 10 years, and all the research is 20 years old, then point that out. If the research has not looked at your specific population, then you will point that out, right? So identify what are the gaps in the existing literature, and introduce how, in your case, in this study, it'll address this gap. And then finally, you will introduce your research question. So when you are setting up your research question, you will identify, well, this is what the literature has to say, this is the existing gap in knowledge, and therefore how will your study address this gap in knowledge, and then state your research question in a question format clearly. So that is essentially the first section of research paper 1. In terms of the appendix, this will be a really short summary, maybe just a couple of paragraphs on your personal and professional experiences that drew you to this topic. So while this is not like the subjectivity essay that you have already completed, you can definitely pull from your subjectivity essay if needed. Or you may choose to simply write this section as a straightforward bio, providing an explanation of why you are qualified to study this topic, or why what perspective you bring based on your personal and professional experiences to this topic, right? What lens do you bring to this topic? And then, of course, make sure that you are, throughout the paper, you are using the APA format. You have a cover page, you have a running title and page numbers, headers and footers as needed. You are following APA format for when it comes to citations and references, as well as grammar. Another thing to note is when you are talking about your literature review or your study purpose, avoid using a lot of direct quotes from the text, and rather synthesize everything or summarize everything in your words, right? So don't, if in your study you found something that's very relevant and sets up the topic, then refrain from the urge of directly copying it into into your study purpose, say, or into your literature review as a direct quote and providing the citations, right? Instead, try and rephrase in your own words more comprehensively, and then provide the citation. Because just lifting direct quotes and putting it in your paper, even when you're citing it, just shows that you can copy quotes. It doesn't necessarily it might make the paper lengthier or more distracting to read. Rather, I would read how you interpreted that sentence and what you came up with. So these are the instructions for your research paper 1. Please let me know if you have any questions. Send me a quick email if you have any questions. All the best and have a great week ahead.